Live from Dubai today, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Joanna Bersecci with your top stories. A fresh pick for Apple. John Ternus is named CEO as Tim Cook hands over the reins after 15 years in which he's built a $4 trillion business. Oil slips and the global stock rally resumes on optimism that the U.S. and Iran will meet for a second round of talks today. Plus, a promise of Fed independence. Kevin Warsh is set to pledge to steer clear of distractions in testimony seen by Bloomberg ahead of his confirmation hearing later today. Well, this is how markets are shaping up in the early hours of trading today. Before the official open, European futures leaning towards positive, up 0.4%. S&P futures also leaning towards green as well, up 0.2, similar amount for NASDAQ. And this after a slight pullback yesterday, some questions over whether the U.S. will extend the ceasefire over here in the region. President Trump telling our colleague at Bloomberg that they will not. That being said, lots of hopes around the potential for a breakthrough or at least further rounds of negotiations in Islamabad the next couple of days. And let's see the reaction in energy markets, because on back of that hope, I would say, we're seeing Brent pull back a little bit, down about 0.5%, but still very close to around $95. We're down about 1% now, but still close to $95. And remember, this is a full $10 higher than where we got to on Friday afternoon when there was talk of a full reopening of the Strait. European gas futures also dropping a little bit today, down 3%. And then the 10-year yield in the U.S. not doing a whole lot today, but I will say there's going to be a lot of focus this afternoon on that testimony that Kevin Warsh is going to be making to the Senate committee. And with that, let's talk about our major risk events to watch out for this morning. 7 a.m., you get UK jobs figures, so keep a close eye on labour developments in the UK market. That is coming in about 55 minutes' time. Then at 10 a.m., we have the German zoo expectations, always a good signal for how consumer and businesses are feeling about the outlook and current environment. And then, as I just mentioned, the Kevin Warsh, who is Trump's appointee to lead the Fed, is scheduled to be speaking in front of the Senate Banking Committee. That happens later today, this afternoon. So those are your main risk events to watch out for. But with that, let's kick off the show. After 15 years at the helm, Tim Cook is stepping down as Apple CEO, handing the reins to John Ternus, the current head of hardware engineering. Ternus will become CEO on September the 1st, and Cook will transition to executive chairman. Join me now is Mark Anderson, Bloomberg's Asia tech editor. Tell us about John Ternus. What do we know about him, and what can we expect from him in his new role?
Hi there. Yes, I think we can say that John Ternus is a continuity candidate. He enjoys the confidence of senior Apple leaders, one of whom told our colleague Mark Gurman that he's a sort of Tim Jr. figure. So I think we can expect to see some of the cost cutting, some of the supply chain shifting and focus that Tim Cook ushered in during his tenure. Also, he's only 50 years old, John Ternus. So I think we can assume that he will be, at least at this early stage, he is, designed to be in his role for some years to come. I think also his previous remit involving hardware was particularly appealing for many of the leadership making this decision, because it comes at a time when Apple is really trying to ramp up its AI offerings.
Yeah. And that seems to be the main challenge here, right? What would you say are the main challenges that he inherits?
Right. Well, I mean, I would say that Apple, is in a position of strength. Of course, it's posting very strong revenue growth, but it's falling behind in the AI race. It's falling behind OpenAI. It's falling behind Anthropic and Google and even Meta. So I think the senior leadership at Apple will really be looking to John Ternus to hit the ground running on some fresh ideas for how it can get some fresh momentum in this race in which it's fallen behind. I think also you could say the company is probably looking for another mega hit device. It's been a few years since it's notched one of those, and I would say also the kind of perennial challenges at the moment of navigating the Trump administration and also shifting manufacturing away from China are also some of the challenges facing John Ternus.
And as of September the 1st, Tim Cook becomes executive chairman. What does that mean in effect?
I would say it means he becomes Apple's chief diplomat. During his tenure, he was known as a supply chain genius who orchestrated the pivoting of Apple's manufacturing away from China towards India and also Vietnam. I think he'll be looking to do more of that. And of course, he'll also have to navigate problems at home, tensions with the Trump administration.
Yep, especially as it pertains to China. As we know, many discussions over the last few years vis-a-vis Apple and their manufacturing in China, now in India. Mark Anderson, thank you so much, Bloomberg's Asia tech editor. Well, a rally in global equities has resumed on optimism over talks to end the Iran war. Let's see how Asian markets are faring with Winnie Su in Hong Kong. And Winnie, I just wonder today whether markets are focused on geopolitics or whether it's actually all about the tech trade again.
Yeah, morning, Jomana. I guess it's tailwinds from both, as you mentioned. In fact, we're looking at MSCI Asia here up slightly less than 1% and hovering around those highest levels in 7 weeks or so. And in fact, leading gains today, you have South Korea's Kospi index jumping more than 2%. And that is on the back of these optimism around AI, as you just mentioned. So we are at a record high right now. And you flip the board and take a look at how these stocks, in fact, are also at record high levels. You have MSCI Asia's infotech sector also jumping 2% around those levels. And it's coming off these earnings optimism as what we saw in TSMC, in Samsung, all pointing to solid AI demand. And on top of that, overnight, we have news that Marvell and Google are also working on developing new AI chips. So those all helped lift risk sentiment. Now, you stick with tech and flip the board and take a look at today's biggest Hong Kong debut, which is Victory Giant, and shares jumping 60% or so. It's the biggest Hong Kong listing in about 7 months, raising $2.6 billion. Now, this company is a Chinese supplier of NVIDIA, mainly manufacturing these PCBs that are critical for AI chips. So you can see how it's really getting more support from the surging global AI demand. Back to you, Jomana.
Winnie, thank you so much. Winnie Su in Hong Kong. Well, President Trump's nominee to be the next chair of the Federal Reserve is expected to promise to protect Fed independence if he is confirmed. Kevin Warsh faces a confirmation hearing before the Senate Banking Committee later today, and Bloomberg has seen a copy of the remarks he's planning to deliver. Let's bring in Bloomberg MLife strategist Mark Cranfield. Well, a couple of things I want to ask you, but first, Mark, if you look at Kevin Warsh's track record, he's historically actually voted quite hawkishly, but we know that Trump wanted to appoint a dove to that position. So which Kevin Warsh are we going to get, the dove or the hawk?
I think you'll probably get the Kevin Warsh today will probably be the one that tries to get himself the job as Fed chairman. So he'll probably try and be as neutral as possible so that he gets past the Senate hearing, although it's going to be a pretty tricky one, considering the fact that you have a war going on in the background. So some of his views on interest rates and reducing the balance sheet may well get lost in the stagflation argument that people will probably present to him and say, well, how are you going to deal with the stagflation risks that are becoming more evident since the pickup in inflation related to the Iran war? That is something that he's going to have to be very careful how he deals with. So whatever he may have thought a few weeks ago when he was originally nominated, so much has changed in the meantime, and he's going to have to be very nimble indeed to deal with the kind of questioning he's going to get today. Investors will be very interested in how he may want to reduce the balance sheet. That was something he's talked about a lot in the past. Won't be as easy as he may have thought.
Yeah, and of course, the other big question on people's minds is what he's going to say about preserving the central bank independence. We've seen a copy of his prepared remarks, and what can we expect in that regard?
Yeah, apparently he's keen to defend the independence of the central bank, which is pretty much what you would expect him to say. It would be very surprising if during a Senate hearing he actually would to say anything else. Investors wouldn't be expecting that at all. But what does that mean in practice? And we've learned from history that what potential Fed chairmen say during their hearings has very little to do with what they actually happens when they actually become the chairman and in practice the job to do. A lot of people will cite Ben Bernanke. If you compare his remarks when he was being put in place for the Fed chairman and what actually happened during his duration, it's completely different. And of course he has to deal with whatever is on his plate at the time. So it may well be that he talks about independence, but then don't forget he has a president who likes to intervene whenever he feels like it in terms of talking about monetary policy. So that might not be quite so easy for him to do. But yes, he has apparently said that the independence of the Federal Reserve is very important. But then what else would you expect? And that's not really a market-moving factor, really. People will be much more interested in what he has to say about the timing for reducing interest rates if he can manage to get that into his confirmation hearing.
Bloomberg MLive strategist Mark Cranfield, thank you so much for the preview. Well, President Trump has told Bloomberg he is unlikely to extend a 2-week ceasefire with Iran, which he says is due to expire Wednesday evening, Washington time, so push back the deadline by 24 hours. Meanwhile, Bloomberg understands Tehran is preparing to send a delegation to Islamabad for talks after earlier casting doubt on its participation. For more, Laura Davison, Bloomberg's Washington deputy bureau chief, joins us from Hong Kong. I guess the main question for everyone this week is, are these talks in Islamabad actually going to happen? And what does it mean for the ceasefire?
That is a really good question. There's been a lot of drama leading up to these talks about whether the Iranians would go. They had said they initially weren't planning to go and now are sending a delegation on the U.S. side. There was confusion about who would be leading. JD Vance now is expected to be the senior U.S. official headed over there, expecting to leave some point in the next 12 to 24 hours from the U.S. to go meet. Trump in his comments to Bloomberg's Jeff Mason said that this deadline now is Wednesday evening. We had all been sort of anticipating that as Tuesday. So just a lot of moving pieces here. And this is all before we even get to the substance of these talks about either extending the ceasefire, which Trump also told Jeff Mason that he would not do, in addition to sort of a broader, more lasting peace deal that involves Iran's nuclear program and all the pieces that Trump wants to see on the table. Trump has continued to say that he thinks that a deal is imminent, is at hand. Iranians have said that there's they have made some progress, but there's some key issues, particularly the future of the nuclear program, that are still unresolved. European allies and others are suggesting this is a process that will take months, not days. So this is a really tense moment, and it is unlikely that we're going to see a massive breakthrough, but could see some incremental steps forward to keep pushing towards some sort of lasting peace.
Yeah, I mean, the stakes are so high for this upcoming round of talks, and still a lot of issues to get through if they do indeed go ahead. Laura Davison, Bloomberg's Washington Deputy Bureau Chief, thank you. Well, still ahead, European companies assess the impact of the Iran war amid surging energy prices. We'll speak exclusively to the CEO of German logistics giant DHL later. But first, oil slips on signs that Iran will attend negotiations with the U.S. in Islamabad. The latest on the world's most important commodity next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. A choppy start to the week for Brent crude. The price of oil slipping on signs that Iran will attend negotiations with the U.S. and Islamabad before a 2-week ceasefire between the two sides ends on Wednesday. Now, oil prices have been buffeted in recent days, with commercial traffic through the Strait of Hormuz still at a virtual standstill. For more, I'm joined by Stephen Satinsky, Bloomberg's energy and commodities reporter. Stephen, what can you tell us about the status right now around the Strait of Hormuz?
I mean, traffic has essentially been halted since Sunday. That's when Iran said that they would reimpose their essential ban on traffic because of the U.S. blockade on Iranian vessels. Yesterday, an Iranian cargo tanker was taken by the U.S. It was boarded. Its engine room shot so it would stop in place. This was the first time the U.S. has done something, further escalating the tension between Washington and Tehran. And at the same time, right now, we're monitoring a few vessels. There are 3 ships that appear to be going through at the moment. One of them is Iranian-linked. If this Iranian ship is able to successfully go through Hormuz without getting boarded or taken by U.S. authorities, then again, this would be perhaps a small win for Iran. If it is boarded, then it illustrates that they will not be able to get any ships through even as the peace deal negotiations are on the table, and they could potentially meet in Islamabad in the next 24 hours to discuss it if Iran does send a delegation. Now, sure.
Well, I was going to say, I guess it's a chicken and egg scenario over here, but the Iranian delegation have also asserted that they're not going to attend unless the blockade is lifted. So how are traders assessing the potential for the upcoming talks and the real possibility that maybe in anticipation of the talks, you do get the blockade lifted?
I think the traders are looking at this as a glass half full situation. When you look at the oil prices, that's where we basically stand, right? With Brent oil in the mid $90 level, it is higher than pre-war levels, where we were in maybe the $70 range, but it's not as high as the height of the war when we were a few weeks back when we were in $110 level for Brent. So we're somewhere right in the middle, and likely traders trying to hedge their bets. But it does indicate that there is maybe some sort of expectation that even if there isn't a peace deal, maybe the ceasefire is extended for a week, 2 weeks, 10 days, anything to just keep this going. And maybe you'll start to see an easing of traffic. Because last week, before the recent spat and tension over Hormuz between the U.S. and Iran, you did see some traffic kind of come back. Not huge traffic, right? We're talking 10, 20 vessels a day compared to more than 135 before the war began. Yeah. But still, you were seeing some sort of increase there.
And yet, yesterday, Kuwait declared a further force majeure on oil shipments. Talk us through the announcement.
Yeah, so customers received force majeures for shipments, not just now and that have been happening, that were supposed to happen over the last month, but also future shipments, and a warning as well that even if there was some sort of normality, if there was Hormuz to open again, you would still have delays and potentially cancellations as they increase their output, right? They were not only hit as tensions were quite high in March with attacks, but also they're dealing with higher inventories. Their ships, full within the Persian Gulf, so you have to bring some new ships in there. It does sort of indicate and illustrate that even if Hormuz were to open, it would take a while for the market to get back to normal. Not only are our facilities have to be restarted or ramp up production, you also have some places that need to repair their plants. One being the Ras Laffan LNG export plant in Qatar. It was damaged by Iranian missiles in mid-March, and because of that, it could take 3 to 5 years to fully bring back 17% of their capacity that was damaged there.
Bloomberg, Stephen Safinsky in Singapore, thank you so much for bringing us the latest on the Strait. Well, coming up, Mistral AI says it's focused on helping large enterprises customize models to their own data and workflows. Our interview with the French AI company's chief revenue officer is coming up next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Mistral AI has been shifting beyond its open source roots, building out a full stack platform aimed at helping large companies tailor AI to their own data and workflows, particularly in industries like finance and manufacturing. Chief Revenue Officer Marjorie Janovich spoke to us about the global momentum.
We very much found our niche in the context of larger enterprises needing customization of models and portability of models everywhere. It means that we coexist with the players you've mentioned, and we've really found our stride in helping organizations really achieve end-to-end business transformation. Use cases where off-the-shelf AI is not sufficient, when you're going to need really to deploy those models everywhere and customize them to your own IP, to your own data. Really, Mistral is finding great leadership in that segment of the market.
How much revenue comes from outside of France and outside of Europe?
Yeah, we've seen a tremendous, I would say, acceleration globally. So we have quite a bit of a customer in Asia today, Ministry of Defense Singapore, the Ministry of Home Affairs in Singapore as well, and more momentum in Asia. In the United States, we're having also quite a bit of momentum with customers like Cisco, Dell, all the way to Snowflake. So the momentum that Mistral is experiencing is very global in nature. And that's because the need of customization and the need of portability is not only a geopolitical topic. It's a topic that's concerning all enterprises that are really trying to achieve return on investment. And for that, customization is a key topic for them wherever they are.
Is Mistral AI fully committed to the US?
We are very committed to the US, very committed to all markets, and most importantly, very committed to the larger enterprise that's really in need to accelerate their transformation.
Bloomberg's Francine Lacroix speaking to Mistral AI's Chief Revenue Officer, Marjorie Janovich. Now to some corporate news. Jeff Bezos is reportedly close to a $10 billion fundraising round for his AI startup that's developing models capable of understanding the physical world. The FT cites people familiar with the deal, saying the fresh funding values the company, known as Project Prometheus, at $38 billion. The startup has dozens of employees, some of them poached from leading AI labs such as OpenAI and Google DeepMind. Amazon shares rose after the bell following news it will invest $5 billion in Anthropic and may inject $20 billion more over time. Anthropic, maker of the Claude chatbot, also plans to spend more than $100 billion over the next 10 years on Amazon cloud services and AI chips. Amazon is one of Anthropic's biggest backers, with prior investments totaling $8 billion. And the German chancellor has said his government rejects hostile and aggressive tactics in Germany's banking industry. Friedrich Merz was speaking to German banking executives after Commerzbank formally rejected UniCredit's takeover bid. The UniCredit CEO had earlier issued a stinging criticism of Commerzbank's strategy. And Andrea Archel will be speaking with Francine Lacroix on The Pulse. Catch that interview today at 9 a.m. London time. Very topical. And coming up, Euro area PMIs due later this week could offer an early read on the effects of the Iran war as companies face up to surging energy prices. We'll also speak exclusively to the CEO of German logistics firm DHL next. This is Bloomberg. Live from Dubai today, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Joanna Versace with your top stories. A fresh pick for Apple. John Ternus is named CEO as Tim Cook hands over the reins after 15 years in which he's built a $4 trillion business. Oil slips and the global stock rally resumes on optimism that the U.S. and Iran will meet for a second round of talks. Plus, a promise of Fed independence. Kevin Warsh is set to pledge to steer clear of distractions in testimony seen by Bloomberg ahead of his confirmation hearing later today. And this is how markets are reacting in the early hours of trade as we head into the European Open. European stock futures up 0.5%, S&P and the Nasdaq up 0.2 and 0.3 respectively. We saw a bit of a dip yesterday, this after President Trump made some comments to our Bloomberg colleague suggesting that the ceasefire in the Middle East will not be extended beyond the Wednesday deadline. So there are high stakes involved for these potential upcoming Islamabad talks if they do indeed take place. But beyond that, of course, still keeping a close eye on the earnings season in the U.S., in Europe, and on Kevin Warsh's testimony later today in front of the Senate banking panel. So that's something to watch out for today. Commodities, though, still in focus. We are seeing Brent slip a little bit today on back of that optimism surrounding those Islamabad talks or potential talks. And the selling has accelerated in the last hour. We're now down 1.6%, just shy of $94, but still about $8 higher than where we got to on the lows on Friday after there was a suggestion that the streets would be fully reopened again. Clearly, that has not transpired. European markets, gas futures down 3% as well. Those are Dutch TTF contracts. And then 10-year yield in the U.S. as we head into Kevin Warsh's testimony, not doing a whole lot. 4.24 is where we're at. Though I will note that the front end of the U.S. Treasury curve is pricing in about 13 basis points worth of rate cuts by the end of this year. Time now for your front page news. The financial press today dominated by Tim Cook's decision to step down as Apple CEO. The FT points out that John Ternus will become only Apple's third chief executive in 30 years. It says he will take over at a challenging time for the company as it faces pressure from the Trump administration to shift production to the U.S. The Wall Street Journal describes Ternus as a veteran engineer and says Tim Cook will be remembered for squeezing so much profit out of the iPhone. And Germany's Handelsblatt says Ternus is taking over from Tim Cook earlier than expected. The paper reports Cook will now focus on Apple's relationships with global political decision makers, a field in which it says Ternus has little experience. And you can get a roundup of the stories you need to know to get your day going in today's edition of Daybreak. Terminal subscribers can go to DAYB Go. That is on the terminal. Some of the top stories for today. But let's go back to Apple. Tech stocks are leading a rally in global equities today. Let's get more on the change of guard at Apple. Joining me now from Los Angeles is Mark Gurman, Bloomberg's chief correspondent for Apple. So start off by telling us what we know about John Ternus and what his main challenges are going to be.
Ternus has been Apple's head of hardware engineering for the last 5 years. He's done an excellent job. His legacy in that role is upping the product quality and the performance of the company's products. We've seen how the iPhone has evolved in recent years with the iPhone Pro models and the iPhone Air. And so he's done a very good job there, also on the iPad. The MacBook Neo has been a smash hit so far. And so he's the right guy. He's got the product chops. He's got the age. And he's got the charisma and the innovation spirit in order to be Apple's next CEO. So I think it was a great choice and probably the only choice for Apple at this juncture.
Do we understand anything about what his AI strategy could look like when he takes over the reins?
The AI strategy at Apple is now to become a platform company and use the software stack to run AI from various other players on top of its hardware that Ternus has helped lead the development of. Apple runs AI models on its hardware better than any other company at this point in terms of computers. So they're going to keep pushing down that path.
Mark, really good to have you on. Bloomberg's chief correspondent for Apple, Mark Gurman. Well, commercial traffic through the Strait of Hormuz is at a virtual standstill after a brief and confused weekend reopening that ended with the first U.S. seizure of an Iranian vessel. President Trump has told Bloomberg that the straits will stay blockaded until a deal is signed. Now, while the Strait of Hormuz remains effectively closed, companies moving goods across continents are working to assess how they will be impacted by surging energy prices, jet fuel shortages, and rising air freight rates. So join me now for an exclusive conversation is Tobias Meyer, CEO of DHL Group. Really good to have you with us on the show. Let me start off by asking you how the Iran war has disrupted your own business operations.
Yeah, good morning, Joanna. Well, it obviously had a tremendous impact over recent weeks, and we're very glad also for the safety of our employees that now the immediate military threat to GCC countries has reduced. We had some quiet days, but the main economic problem, the Straits of Hormuz still being closed. That has not been removed. That's impacting us as it relates to the movement of containerized goods. But it obviously creates this issue. The world is lacking 10, 12 million barrels of crude oil every day.
Yeah. You know, a lot of comparisons are being drawn between this episode and COVID in terms of the supply chain disruption. How would you say what's happening today compares to what happened back in COVID times?
Well, I think this is very different. COVID led to a significant spike in the demand for certain goods. People couldn't spend on services because they weren't allowed to go out, they weren't allowed to gather, and that shifted significant spending power into new electronics and other commodities, which then led to that huge demand spike. Here, we have some operational disruptions. We had closure of airspace. That's something that is not entirely new, but the order of magnitude is new. We shouldn't forget that Western airlines are also not flying over Russia. So the corridors that are left for the transit, especially between Asia and Europe, have become quite limited, and that remains a concern.
Yeah.
And then there is the problem in the supply of oil. We are still addicted to hydrocarbons, and especially for aviation, there is no alternative to jet fuel for the foreseeable future, and that remains a big concern.
Yeah, and given what you're saying, and given, I mean, we've been reporting on this, the squeeze that's occurring in jet fuel, are you repositioning any of your planes? Are you preparing for the possibility of shortages over the next few months?
Well, on this, there's not much we can do. We're talking to our suppliers. Obviously, the willingness to pay is important in this. The price needs to steer where oil and its products are going. That's the best mechanism that we know. And that's, I think, also politically important. This shortage of supply will need to create price signals that steer this into the right channels so that essential elements, the transport of critical goods, for instance, can be maintained. We cannot tanker fuel for intercontinental flights. That's technically not possible. That's also neither economic nor environmentally wise. So the supply is something that needs to be organized with the respective companies locally, and that could become a problem, especially in Asia.
And overall, though, what does air cargo movement actually look like right now in the region? Give us an update on the capacity and where you stand.
So we obviously have a significant reduction in the capacity available by the Middle Eastern hub carriers. Those operations are still very much limited. For us as DHL, we have a large own fleet of around 300 aircraft. Our main hub in the region used to be Bahrain. We weren't able to use Bahrain for some weeks. That's now starting up again. We used Riyadh and Muscat primarily as airports of entry. We used other seaports, and we have a very extensive road network in the region. So we were able to support our customers well over the last weeks, and I'm very proud of our colleagues in the regions who put up with those very adverse circumstances to keep goods moving and keep supply chains running, but especially the situation on the energy supply and the continued blockage also of the Strait of Hormuz for containerized goods, that continues to create challenges.
Yeah, okay, so how has that translated to air freight costs? What have we seen in terms of pricing for, since the inception of the war, which is going on for almost 2 months now? And can we continue to expect higher push pricing on these air freight costs in the coming weeks and months?
Yeah, so there's the immediate region where indeed there's also now strong demand. More goods need to be flown. We see also a strong demand for technical goods, spare parts, for repairs. So that is very strong. But maybe the bigger spillover in terms of overall effect on freight rates is on the Asia-Europe trade lane, where the capacity of the Middle Eastern hub carriers has played an important role. Now that capacity is lacking. So you see tight markets out of India, out of Southeast Asia, especially to Europe, and you will continue to see elevated freight rates up until the situation has further eased and resolved itself in the Middle East itself.
Yeah, and of course, there is a lot of optimism that maybe we get a diplomatic breakthrough in the coming days. And I just wonder, looking ahead, whether you expect to see a permanent realignment, a structural realignment of trade, the way trade is conducted between East and West, perhaps the emergence of new corridors, pipelines that look to bypass the Strait of Hormuz. Is it your expectations that we will see a reconfiguration somehow of some of these supply chains?
I'm not sure. The Middle East is structurally attractive. The inherent growth factors, relatively young population, a very conducive economic policy. I don't think that will change. And people also, economic decision makers, tend to forget pretty quickly. The region was turbulent over the last 30, 40 years. We as DHL have experienced some of that. So it is not an entire surprise. Now, the conflict might be larger than what we have seen in recent years, for sure, and it's very tragic for the people that are impacted. But I do not believe this will structurally change how trade is facilitated. Trade is flowing, trade is needed. Trade is needed also for people to participate in innovations, think about pharmaceuticals, medical devices. Those will not be produced in every country. Yeah. Quite the opposite. Those goods get more complicated, more concentrated, and these are goods that need to be traded.
Yeah, I guess a broader question then to round things up about the state of the global economy, given the demand that you're seeing right now, how would you describe the health of the consumer in terms of where we are in the cycle and the fact that even though we have this war going on, demand visibly is still there?
Well, we have seen this before, that you have crisis situations that are not fully recognized by consumers as having an impact. And then there is this one event, a big plant closure in a Western country that sparks broader discussion, broader uproar around the real economic implications for people, and then it flips. And then you see a significant change in consumer sentiment. Now, this hasn't happened yet, and I think there is also a lot of political talk trying to prevent that from happening. But if the underlying economic issue, the lack of supply of energy, the 10, 12 million barrels of crude oil per day, if that is not resolved, it will come to that tipping point. And I think there are many people that are aware of that, and that's why also those discussions are needed, and political momentum is building up to resolve the situation in the Strait of Hormuz.
DHL Group CEO Tobias Meyer, thank you so much for joining our show today. We appreciate it. Well, coming up, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer's political future may now rest with the official who got fired over the appointment of Peter Mandelson as ambassador. We'll look ahead to today's crucial parliamentary hearing on the matter. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. And now to some of the other top stories we're following this morning. European Central Bank President Christine Lagarde says two main factors around the Iran war are hampering efforts to map out a monetary policy response. Speaking in Berlin, Lagarde said the length of the disruption and the potential spillover of energy prices to broader inflation are complicating the ECB's job. U.S. Labor Secretary Lori Chavez-Derrimer is leaving her post, becoming the latest member of President Trump's cabinet to exit. The White House says she is taking a position in the private sector. Chavez-Derrimer has been under investigation after allegations she engaged in an inappropriate relationship with a staff member, committed travel fraud, and was drinking in the workplace. The Labor Department has denied the accusations. The future of Keir Starmer as UK Prime Minister appears to rest with the bureaucrats he fired over the vetting of former UK Ambassador Peter Mandelson. Former civil servant Ollie Robbins is due to appear before Parliament today and is expected to say he felt pressure to approve Mandelson despite opposition from vetting officials. Keir Starmer yesterday apologised for the appointment.
At the heart of this, there is also a judgment I made that was wrong. I should not have appointed Peter Mandelson. I take responsibility for that decision. And I apologise again to the victims of the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein, who were clearly failed by my decision.
Let's bring in Bloomberg opinion columnist Rosa Prince. So we just heard Keir Starmer saying he's sorry, he's apologized, but he's still facing criticism for claiming he was unaware of the vetting issues around Peter Mandelson.
Yeah, he is. The Prime Minister had a very uncomfortable couple of hours in the House of Commons yesterday afternoon, and this morning things aren't going to get much better for him. Really, that original sin of appointing Peter Mandelson to the biggest diplomatic job in the UK Foreign Service, which is UK Ambassador to the US, it doesn't go away. It's still there, and he was repeatedly criticised for that. And the reason for that is that a lot of the flaws in Peter Mandelson, he had a bit of a shady past, were well known, including his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, including his business links to China and Russia, and not least the fact that he'd had to resign twice before from the UK cabinet. So a bad decision. Mr. Starmer is doing his best, though, to deflect some of that guilt, at least, by blaming the Foreign Office. So it emerged last week that Mandelson actually failed his security vetting, and yet the Foreign Service still put him forward for the job, said he was cleared. And they themselves admit, Ollie Robbins, the senior official, admits that he did not tell Mr. Starmer about that. And the Prime Minister said he was furious. Ollie Robbins, we understand, will say, that was the way that the procedure works. You either are cleared to go or not. And he is expected to say he felt under pressure to push through the appointment despite those security concerns because he thought that was what Starmer wanted.
Yeah, I mean, unless you've been following UK politics very closely, you probably would be unfamiliar with who Ollie Robbins actually is. How much influence is he going to have, or is he likely to have, on Keir Starmer's future today?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, you're kind of not meant to know who he is. So the British government works by having elected politicians that take the decisions and then unelected officials who implement them, and they're meant to keep a low profile. Ollie Robbins was a little bit more well known to the British public because he had led the negotiations during Brexit. So he was a familiar face to some members of the public, but still relatively low key. I think that's all going to change this morning when he appears before a powerful committee of MPs and to explain himself. I think it could be extremely uncomfortable for the Prime Minister. He's already an unpopular Prime Minister, and we here are going into big midterm local elections in a couple of weeks. And he had hoped that he was kind of getting his premiership back on track. He had been praised for the way he did not follow Donald Trump into the war in Iran. But that looks like that's all going to dissipate as Mr. Robbins really hits back and seeks not to take the blame for this big mess.
I guess one of the key questions here is, does the Prime Minister have the support of key Labour lawmakers as well? What is his standing within his own party?
Great question. You're right, because no matter how far Keir Starmer falls in the opinion polls, he will stay in his job as long as his own colleagues, Labour legislators, his MPs, choose not to seek to topple him. Now, from what I'm hearing around Westminster, they still haven't reached that point. Partly that is because those elections are coming down the track. But a big part of it, I think, is that however upset they are with him, and they don't think he's a good Prime Minister either. They're very unhappy that the party is doing so badly and that voters have turned against the Labour Party, not least for the populist Reform UK. They do not agree on who they would replace him with. And they're kind of, each candidate is kind of blocked by a faction who doesn't like them. So as long as that scenario continues, Mr. Starmer seems safe in Downing Street.
Bloomberg opinion columnist Rosa Prince, thank you so much. Well, plenty more coming up. We're going to take a look through some of the key charts that we've been looking at today. A big day of events coming up. This is Bloomberg.
Apple has, built up this legacy of an incredible amount of connected devices. And by the way, I think that's the real genius of Tim Cook. He didn't necessarily know which products, but he knew they had to be connected. Now, Ternus is going to take that. He knows which products to develop. So that's what's going to be interesting to watch as we move forward.
Bob O'Donnell from Technalysis Research reacting to the news that Tim Cook is stepping down as Apple CEO. This is a chart of Apple stock over the last year versus Magnificent Seven semiconductor index, the yellow one, the semiconductor index, and clearly shows that there has been a little bit of an underperformance of the Apple stock versus other key Magnificent Seven names in the basket. So again, one of the big challenges for the incoming CEO is how quickly Apple can adopt AI. Switching over, another chart that I'm looking at as well is a front-end yield pricing and the fact that, at least in the case of UK and Japan, 2-year yields are trading higher than the base rate, i.e. the market is implying in a rate hiking cycle, not the case for the U.S., which is essentially flat. So something to bear in mind into that Kevin Warsh testimony later today. And then switching over, just to leave you with a chart on China, everything in China seems to be trading up, whether we're talking about bonds, FX, and equities. So financial fortress is what our colleague is calling it over in Hong Kong. And in terms of risk events today, watch out for 7 a.m. UK jobs figures, 10 a.m. Germany's zoo survey expectations, and then, of course, that Kevin Warsh Senate Banking Hearing Committee later today. And also coming up later on Bloomberg, we'll be speaking with the Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister. Catch that interview at 10:15 a.m. London time. The opening trade is coming up next.